So good evening. How are you all? And welcome. My name is Simon Jacobson. I welcome you all, both here and abroad. For all those sitting here, there are many listening, viewing this online, because I hear it from many people who meet me, and they know every detail and nuance that I've said here, because you see, the advantage of online is you can rewind it later. So I have to be extra careful of things I used to say that were quite irreverent and were not recorded. So I realize now that this can later be used as evidence against me, so I'll couch some of my ideas in some more diplomatic terms. Is that okay? So, as you may know, that, and I've discussed many times here, time, the concept of time in Jewish thought is energy. Time is an energy flow. And long before Einstein, who recognized that not just space, but time is also a power, a force, and energy, Jewish thought, in the Talmud and in the Zohar, and even the earliest texts in the Bible itself, in the Chumash, refer to time as energy. For example, you have the statement in the beginning of Genesis when it says, Sheishis Yomim Osa Hashem Elikim Es Hashemayim V'Sa'aretz, which literally translated means 6 days God created heaven and earth. So the Zohar points out that it should have said B'Sheishis. If you say in a sentence that in 6 days, or in a period of 6 days, you don't say 6 days God created heaven and earth, there's a word missing. And the Zohar answers that actually the 6 days were actually created. Energy, time, is a form of creation. It's a force. So the reason we never really understood it that way scientifically was because space was recognizable. Time seemed like an invisible element. Some even argued was just man-made for convenience purposes, simply for us to be able to measure yesterday, today, and tomorrow, past, present, and future. But time is energy, and therefore the Jewish calendar reflects an energy flow that parallels our lives. And many deep and powerful and personal lessons can be gleaned from studying this calendar, which of course gives a new take on the whole idea of holidays, and even Shabbos, and the general focus of each day, including our birthdays and other significant dates in our lives, that those dates actually something is taking place. It's not just a marker, a symbolic commemorative thing. There's actual energy flowing to us right now. So this day, Wednesday, has a particular energy. Thursday has its own energy. Sunday. In the words of the Zohar, Kol Yom V'Yom Aved Avidite. Every day does its job. So essentially, each day is a flow of energy, and the question is whether we can tap into it and access it. So no different than we tap into, for instance, electricity, which is generated, and that allows us to power our appliances, and lights, and air conditioning, and so on. Is the same is true that there's other energy flowing around that we have ability to tap into and exploit for our own growth and personal development, which is really the concept of technology in general, not just electricity. It's an ability to manipulate and to enter into the deeper, inner, microscopic levels of airwaves and light waves and other microwaves and so on, that in turn allow us to create communication tools that transcend time and space. So the same is true spiritually and emotionally and psychologically. We have the ability to access reservoirs of energy, both within our own souls, but also within the time period that we live in. So this is a unique time that we are now in, and I want to address that cycle. For us in the Northern Hemisphere, this is the end of the summer. Not the end quite yet. I don't want to depress anybody, but it's getting there. The days are getting shorter now, and the nights longer. In Torah thought, that happens approximately around the 15th of Av, which was 2 days ago. The 9th of Av was Tuesday, 16th was basically Monday. Monday was the 15th of Av. And here's the expression in the Talmud. At the end of the tractate of Tainus, the Talmud says that from 15th Av and on, very unusual expression, Tashish Keicha Shalchama, the power of the sun gets weaker. Tashish Keicha Shalchama, the power of the sun gets weaker. And of course the obvious reason for that is, which means the sun shines less hours in the day. And the nights get longer, and as I said, the night's longer and the day shorter. Which, if anyone who lights candles at Friday evening knows that at some point, approximately a month ago, a little more than a month ago, candle lighting was, let's say, 8:14, and now it's down to 7:45, and now it just continues to go. So that's just really the time when the sun sets, 18 minutes before the sun sets. But the expression of the Talmud needs to be really looked at. I mean, why doesn't the Talmud just say the days get shorter? To say the sun gets weaker is actually, one can wonder whether it's even accurate. The sun doesn't get weaker. The sun is just shining less this part of the hemisphere. We know the sun continues to shine even when the sun sets here. It shines other places of the world. And if you're traveling and flying, you could see it. So even when the sun is setting here and you're traveling, let's say, to the east, you'll see, to the west, you can continue seeing daylight until the sun sets there as well. So why does the Talmud use an expression that the sun is getting weaker, when really it's not about the sun, it's really the sunlight as it affects Earth? Not that this is the only place where you have this expression, you have it similar in other places. For example, we make a big thing about the 15th of the lunar month, the full moon. And there's the new moon. Most of the holidays happen on the full moon. Sukkot, Purim, Passover, around the full moon. Rosh Hashanah is on the new moon. The truth is, the whole idea of a new moon, a full moon, a quarter moon, a three-quarter moon, is all really, in our perception, on Earth. This moon is always full. It depends what angle you're looking at it. Because the moon is always reflecting the sun in a full way, except that those coordinates, where the sun is here and the moon is here and we're here, the Earth is here, a perfect triangle, where you get a 90-degree angle of reflection, is only on the full moon. So there is really technically no such thing as a new moon. It's only on Earth it appears like a new moon, a glimmer. But the moon is always reflecting the sun somewhere out in outer space. And yet we make a big thing about it calendar-wise. And not just in calendar-wise, also in folklore. You know, the werewolf on the full moon. So clearly the full moon has an impact on Earth. That's in fairy tales. But the same is true, actually. The moon does have an impact. For example, the tides are affected by the moon, not just the moon itself, but its phases. The full moon has more gravitational pull, and therefore affects the tide. So it's not just that the moon is always there, out there in outer space, but when the light of the moon is fully facing Earth, it does affect the Earth. So it's interesting when you look into the Bible. In the Torah it says that God created the great luminaries, lahoyer ala aretz. The purpose of these luminaries was to shine on Earth. So basically, based on that, it's not about an objective reality whether the moon is full all the time. Based on Earth, where we live, when we see a full moon, it has significance because that's the purpose of the moon. The fact that light is shining somewhere in outer space, not relevant to us. So, but to go back to this expression, this weakening of the sun, that's even more problematic because, as I said, the sun doesn't get weaker, it only gets weaker in regard to our position here on Earth. Now, all this sounds technical, but as you'll see in a few minutes, it's actually quite personal and emotional and spiritual and psychological. And that's based on the idea, as I said, the seasons and time is energy. So this time of the year has particular energy. So what does the Talmud say further? Let me just finish the Talmudic statement, and then we'll analyze it. The Talmud continues on, and therefore, since the nights are starting to get longer and the days shorter, we should begin to increase in our study of Torah, because Lo Ivra Laila Ela Ligirsa, the night was created only in order for us to use it to study more, because the night is more conducive to contemplation. The day and the bustling day, not just our work lives, but in general, the day people are awake, a lot more noise going on. A quieter time at night, more conducive to contemplation, to meditation, to introspection. So we should utilize these days, this time of the year, as the nights get longer, to increase. And as the Talmud puts it in an interesting way, it says that when you increase, you'll increase in your life. Your life will increase as well. Yeshiv Chaim al Chayev is the expression, that there'll be an increase of life to your life. This is a Talmudic statement regarding this period of time in the year. So I want to discuss this in a, based on this, a very, we can glean, as I said earlier, glean from this a very personal, powerful message, or messages. Since, according to the mystics, everything in this universe is microcosm, macrocosm, that means that we have the entire universe within us, and the universe is a large organism. So things like the sun and the moon are all archetypes that exist within us. As the mystics put it, that there are many levels of energy. And generally speaking, there are two types of energy. One is a giving and one is receiving. The moon is a recipient. It reflects the light of the sun. But in the process, it doesn't just reflect it like a mirror, it actually transforms it. And the moon becomes has its own particular personality. You've seen people who love each other stare at the moon. You don't see them staring at the sun, even with sunglasses. The moon has its own particular sensual and romantic glow that the sun doesn't have. So even though the sun, in pure brute power, is far, far more powerful than the moon, it's a furnace of heat. You can't land on the moon, on the sun. Man has landed on the moon. So yet, and the moon has nothing but that reflection, yet the moon has its own power and energy. Even on a basic scientific level, there are plants that actually grow by moonlight. There are creatures that come out, nocturnal creatures in the moon in the night. And then there are the forces that are affected by the sun. So in discussing the concept of sun and moon on a conceptual level, we actually each have both a sun within us and a moon within us. In the spherotic structure, if you're familiar with the 10 spheres, so the moon is considered to be like Malchus. So there are 10 spheres and 7 emotional ones. The last 7 emotions are, Chesed, Gvura, Teferet, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. If you have my book on Omer that I've done, there it's enumerated. What that means, in simple English, is that the spectrum of emotional experience divided into 7 different expressions. 6 and 1 is Malchus. They are Chesed is love and kindness, Gvura is discipline, Teferet is compassion or balance, beauty, and Netzach is endurance, persistence. Then comes Hod is humility. Then Yesod is bonding, commitment, connecting to something in a powerful way. And finally, Malchut is the last one. It's called dignity. Malchut literally means the queen, or queenship, or kingship. First to the dignity that each of us has. Now, here's not the place to go into the meaning and the relevance of all these 7 emotions. As I said, the Omer book that I have spells it out with exercises. But Malchut is compared to the moon. As the Zohar says, the Malchut, like the moon, lesla megamoklum, has no light, has nothing of its own. That it is the quintessential recipient, the quintessential state of receiving something, absorbing. And the sun is the opposite. The sun is the mashpia, as opposed to the moon's makabel. The sun is a giver, a transmitter. To give you an example of how that plays itself out in our lives, we too have 2 states of mind, or states of being. There are times we absorb, receive, and there are times we give and transmit. I'll use myself as a kosher guinea pig as an example in this laboratory here. For many years, the work I did was, as some of you may know, I write about it in the introduction to Torah Meaning for Life. My job was to absorb. What does that mean? It means that on Shabbos and holidays, when no notes were written, and no notes were taken, and no tape recorders. I was part of a team, I was the head of a team that absorbed hours and hours of the Rebbe, the Lubavitch Rebbe's talks on Shabbos and holidays. And we had to use our minds to remember it all. And then after Shabbos and the Yom Tov and the holiday, to recreate it on paper, review it, and reconstruct it. So I had personal first-hand experience in something that very few have today, because most of us, we rely on technology. We don't necessarily rely on our minds to remember a lecture for 2, 3, and this was sometimes 4 or 5 hours, and sometimes even longer. And it taught me many things about how the mind works. People always ask me, what are the trade secret to remember so many hours? So there are, obviously there's an element of a gift, and not everyone can just do it even with work. But there are actually also methods. And I can guarantee you use these methods, employ these methods, your memory will improve many times over. And what's one of the key things? One of the key things is to know how the mind works. Why, for example, do children remember better than adults? Like songs, stories, even little details that happened when you were very young can remain etched in your memory forever. As adults, things happen, something weird had happened, and how to remember, we need to have all kinds of gadgets to try to retain things. Which is really actually quite ironic, or quite paradoxical for that matter, because children have less developed minds than adults do. That's a given. And yet memory is a faculty of the intellect. And yet children remember better. The reason is, one of the reasons is because children don't think with their egos. Or to put it in more technical terms, they don't process while they're absorbing. And we'll do the experiment now, since it's an experiment on me, I'll do an experiment on you right now, as we speak. Because you've probably not been trained otherwise, what you're doing as you hear me is you're absorbing, but more than absorbing, you're processing. Now you may think, what other option do you have? What should you do? Not a process. The mind is listening. How else are you going to appreciate or understand what I'm saying if you're going to listen? I mean, there's a third option, to fall asleep and neither absorb nor process. But we're not going that direction. Okay? Actually, sometimes that may be the best way to listen, because you don't get in the way with your own interests. But the process like this is because when you are processing, what you're doing is, like adults, you hear someone speak, even if you respect the person or you want to listen, usually you think in terms of, I like what he has to say, I don't like what he has to say, I can make money with this, I can't make money with this, I just explain certain things that I always struggled with. One idea that I may mention may spark other ideas. Now all that I've said, it doesn't seem like a bad thing at all. What's wrong with processing? There's nothing per se wrong with it, but what happens is that you're a partner in the transmission. You're no longer hearing an undiluted transmission, you're also hearing yourself processing. Which means that very often you'll even miss the point, if it's a subtle point, or it's a point you don't really want to hear, because you're processing it on your terms. True absorption is listening without processing, the ability to just hear what the person is saying. Now, I'm not trying to put you on the spot to change the way you do things, I'm just pointing it out. You'll do what you want to do anyway. And so, for example, if you had to research something, whatever it may be, you have to write a paper, make a presentation, proposal, whatever, some research, and you have to sound intelligent. And you have to show that you've done your homework, okay? And not only in school, even out of school, there are times we need to do that. So what are you going to do? I mean, I'm talking about serious research. You really need to do it, you want to do it, you're not looking for shortcuts. You go on a search, whether it's a Google search or a book search or other ways, or consulting people, you're going to gather information. And your job is, for whatever reason, maybe this is a proposal for you to present a major multi-billion-dollar proposal to someone, $1 million proposal. So you're going to do your homework, gather as much information as you can. Things you know, things you don't know, you'll ask someone. Or God forbid if you have to research a medical situation. So if you really want to do it right, you want to be thorough, you're going to research. You're not going to come to a conclusion in the middle of your research, because you may miss something. You don't want to come to a conclusion. Maybe there's other facts that you didn't consider. Just like if we were standing in front of a judge, or a jury, you wouldn't want them, just because there's a persuasive witness, to suddenly sway them. You'd want them to hear all the evidence and then weigh it. That's essentially what happens when we process before we finish hearing and absorbing. So children, because they have not yet learned to process, they don't have an ego to need to process. They're like they're a dry sponge, ready to absorb. They absorb everything. It may be hard to get a child's attention. It may be hard to keep a child concentrated because a child has a certain attention span and so on. But so do adults, for that matter. What do they say? 8 seconds? I don't know. I mean, it's going down, they say. But I think on television it's 7 minutes or something. 7 minutes, and there's no ad, is big problems. As if like an ad is like the thing that is our liberation, you know, from listening and watching something too long. I find that quite comical, but that's another story. And what are we watching already? You know. But the point is that children don't yet have the need to. So children, once you do get their attention, and if you do, they absorb. That's why it's very hard to teach, for example, a language to adults. It's very hard to teach. I mean, not that it's impossible, because a language, meaning ABC of a new language, and the way it's pronounced, we don't have the patience. Which really means we don't have the patience to just absorb letters and things that don't have real value, utilitarian value immediately. Children, and it's not a will thing. It's not like you can will it. Your mind already has too much in it to sit down now and learn basic tools. A child doesn't even know what ABC is. You teach ABC, A, they picture an A. You go back and you ask a child, do you know what an A is? No. When they're children. It's just what they're teaching us. We don't even know why they're teaching it to us. We know why. Because when you learn the letters, you learn how to build letters into words, and words turn into sentences, and that's how you convey ideas, and that's how you read, and that's how you communicate, etc., etc. So children, because they're innocent and their mind is like a clean slate, in that sense, they absorb these things easily. That's why, for instance, I think at the age of 12 or 13, if a person comes from a foreign country, they'll have an accent if it's after around 12, 13. Earlier than that, they can speak like perfect English, let's say if they're Russian or so on, or vice versa. Because accents and other things become part of our tools that we've already developed, and already by age 12 we've developed a lot. It's not full-blown yet, but it's developed a lot. So children absorb, we process at best, and absorb is compromised completely, almost completely. But you could be trained to learn to absorb and not process. It takes a lot of effort, and you have to want to do it. You have to see value in doing it, obviously. If you don't see value, why would you do it? So I remember when I did this work, it was an active effort. It wasn't just automatic. An active effort to shut down the processor, the wheel in the brain called the processor, and allow only the wheel of the absorber to function. And it wasn't easy, because sometimes it's exactly what happened. The Rebbe would say something very fascinating, and you get excited, and maybe resolve something you've always been struggling with. And you had to stop that energy, even though it's like so positive, and to do it later. Not that stop it forever. Remember, the absorption is the processing is only a pause. At some point, you will finish absorbing, and then you can begin the processing. And trust me when I tell you, whenever there was too much understanding of the idea, which means processing, the absorption was compromised. And later, I could not remember properly, which really ended up being that I couldn't process also properly. So the interesting twist was, in the name of so-called appreciating the ideas, end up compromising the ideas. Because everything has its time. If you absorb when you should absorb, you'll process when you can process. And if you process when you should be absorbing, you won't be processing properly when you're processing. That's how it is. And this is also true. I see, sometimes I teach people with text. And it's like people with intelligent people learning a class and reading text. I see it almost all the time. And most people just don't know how to read a text. They're already analyzing it. They're using their minds, and some of them maybe even rewrite. They're immediately connecting it to other ideas, asking questions, and they haven't even finished the sentence. Maybe the teacher, the writer, has something to say about this. Maybe if you finish it, it may answer some of those questions. And even if it doesn't, you could always ask the questions later. But it's not just impatience, it's just the lack of ability to absorb, and to know the patience to need to absorb. A child comes to speak to you, your child or someone's child, and they cry about something that you consider to be ridiculous, trivial. But if you truly love that child, you're going to listen, not just fake it. You're going to listen because it's the child. It bothers the child. It doesn't bother you. Fine. That's an example. It's also with adults. There are good listeners and there are non-good listeners. Just for the record, I don't find very many good listeners. Very, very few. Most people, if you ask them, you're a good listener, almost everyone says they're a good listener. So where the non-listeners, they're the same place where the non-conformists are. Everybody says they're non-conformists. Same place where the conformists are, rather. Everybody says they're good, great listeners and non-conformists. So there's some closet that has, I guess, a few billion conformists and non-listeners. Now, I don't think anyone is deceiving themselves. I think we don't even know what the word listening means. We confuse listening with hearing. Yeah, if someone asks you listening means you don't have a hearing aid. Of course, you could hear words, hear sounds. That's not listening. So, all this is to explain, as an example, in our personal lives, the difference between the sun and the moon. So the sun is a transmitter. Doesn't know how to listen. The moon only knows how to listen. Obviously, we need both. So there's an expression in the Talmud talking about the laws of kashrut that says, I did the Torah lemivla lepolit, I did the Torah lepolit lemivla. You got that? Okay, we can move on. Okay, it's an Aramaic statement that says, I always like to do that because nobody knows Aramaic. I don't mean in an insulting way. It's like, I did the Torah lemivla lepolit. Are you absorbing or you're processing? So I did the Torah. Here you have to absorb because you don't know what the words mean. So I did the Torah lemivla lepolit means that when you're busy absorbing, you can't be busy transmitting. Usually if you're listening, you can't be speaking. I know some people think they could, but they're wrong. And just like when you're busy inhaling, you can't be exhaling. You can't inhale and exhale at the same time. Would you agree? So the same, and then there's the other expression, the other second half of the statement. I did the Torah lepolit lemivla. When you're busy transmitting or giving off what the word? Not transmitting, exuding. You can be busy absorbing, and this is relevant actually to laws of kashrut concerning certain foods. There are absorbers of foods, and there are foods that give off strong taste or scent and stuff like that. So it affects, in other words, something is kosher, not kosher. It depends also what kind of food it is. There are foods that are absorbers, and there are foods that are transmitters. And they're the same foods that sometimes in different states, if you heat them, they change their personality. The point is that, though it's not mutually exclusive, but to understand this well, it's important to dissect into two stages. There's absorbing, listening, and there's speaking. A person who doesn't know how to listen doesn't really deserve to be listened to, obviously. Even though, as again, some people think that they have a lot to give. I have a guy, I'm not mentioning names, he calls me every few months, and like as if he's giving me some gift. I wish he knew what I was thinking, but I just don't want to humiliate him. He says, I can share this with, this type of thing. He's giving me this thing, as if like I'm interested in what he has to share, and as if I have even time for it. But he's like classical things that he's got the whole world figured out, and he's sharing with me his trade secrets about the universe. I don't know why I'm saying it. I guess I'm just venting since I have the floor. But it's a personality type. He calls me up as if like he's sharing me. He's like, with you I can share it. Like, as if like, okay. Well, once I did say to him, it's all right if you don't share it with me. Fine, I'm not that disturbed. And he was like taken aback. Like, how could I not be appreciating his God's gift of his wisdom? So there are people who just think that they have so much to give and they don't have to listen because they have it all worked out. They're just some type of prophet or something, God's transmitter. Anybody here in that type of mode? Huh? Anyway, but to go back to our discussion here, this obviously is much more broader than just communication and absorbing. I just was using that as an example. Let's take it now to a more complicated subject, matter of love, matter of relationships. How much in a relationship is absorbing and how much is giving. And obviously, a good relationship, it should be a symbiotic relationship where two people are both giving and both receiving, and hopefully not at the same time. Because if two people are talking at the same time, usually, as they say, that joke, she says, the therapist, when we were dating, he did all the talking and I did the listening. First 5 years of our marriage, I did all the talking and he did the listening. And now, we both do the talking and the neighbors do the listening. I guess that's like sun, moon, and then just a major... an eclipse, maybe that's what it's an eclipse, a solar and lunar eclipse all in one. What? Yeah, explosion. So, applying it to the issues of relationships, and our own personalities, I think it's an excellent exercise to look at yourself. Maybe the new way. Now we're coming in the 15th of Av, the full moon. As I said, on one hand is the full moon, on the other hand the sun gets weaker, which we shall soon discuss, and they're connected to each other. It's a good time to look at this part of our personalities. You may be surprised if you really applied some objective thought to it, or asked a friend, which is, what type of personality you are. Now, just for the record, it's important to know we have to all have both elements, but you can't have them all under control until you really look at them and see where you're at. Some of us naturally have one or the other. I find is that the symptom of people you meet don't have the ability to be silent. I always see it as like some type of personality of a thief, because he's always guilty, feels guilty inside, can't afford to be silent. So the personality of a thief, you meet a thief in the street, he's the personality of a thief, you always see he always has to say something, because silence is very awkward. Secure people don't need to speak. Someone who has something to hide is like speaking and making believe the speaking is as if it's concealing the fact that something else is going on. It's a personality. Very secure people can know when to be silent. And if you're with someone you love and you trust, are you able to be silent? Because they always have to be something be said. Can both of you be silent? These are signs of a mature relationship. And I don't mean silent because no one has what to say, or silent because you're afraid to say something. It's because a silence is a comfort in a way. You have what to say, but you don't have to always say it. It's the ability to be yourself without having to constantly express it or show that I'm here. People have to always be extroverts. It's usually a sign of insecurity, frankly. Not all introverts are insecure either. You need to have a combination of the two. So when it comes to relationships, the sun and the moon become extreme examples of this. So to go back to this period in time, as I said, on the 15th of Av, when the Talmud says the sun gets weaker, it happens to be the full moon, and the Talmud also calls it the greatest, there were no holidays in Israel like the holiday of the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur of all days. So it's interesting how this day, the 15th of Av, which is an obscure day, is equated with the holiest day of the year. What's the connection? So the Talmud goes through different types of connections and special things that happen on the 15th of Av. But on a deeper level, it has a lot to do with this whole moon-sun relationship. The expression why the Talmud says the sun gets weaker means the solar energy, the energy of transmitting, gets weaker. In the day, when we wake up in the day by nature, and not just because people work it by day and they sleep by night, there's also a different change of climate. For example, you see that when you have jet lag. Daylight and sun and moonlight and the night energy. The night does change our bodies. Our bodies go down. There is what is the chemical called that they try to counter when you for jet lag purposes. Some chemical that is much more intense during the day. Anybody knows the serotonin? Is that it? Melatonin. Okay, one of the two. What's serotonin then? One onum or the other. Let's put it this way. Okay, fine. So the fact is, how many of you consider yourself, let's say, day people, and how many are like night birds? Any night birds in the room here? Huh? Me too. Yeah. Vampires, right? Right. You're a vampire?
Well, my allergies are not.
Oh. Are you sure? Can you prove?
I've always been geared toward night.
Okay. Well, in the earlier days of this class is used to go till, I don't know, sometimes 3, 4, sometimes to the wee hours. I guess that's the luxury of people who don't have day jobs. They can pontificate into the night about all existential issues. And so there are night birds, night fegelach they call them, night birds. And there are day birds, I guess. Some people wake up the crack of dawn or even earlier. And no question there's a certain energy then. It's not about right or wrong, I guess. It's different personalities. So it would be a good study to know why some people are this way, some others. Is it a condition? Is it based on acquired conditions, or is it a natural, inherent thing? Not sure. But regardless, it's not surprising, because the fact is there's two types of energy. In the Kabbalah it says that there are 24 different sirufim, which are configurations of the letters of the name of God. 24. 12 that correspond to the day, Yud Beis Sirufi Havai, and then the 12 of Adnai that correspond to the night. As I said before, time is energy. So every hour has its particular energy. The hours of the day have its 12, the hours of the night 12. Now you may say, well, it's not exactly 12. There are times in the year where night is less than 12 and day is more than 12. There are parts of the world where it's half a year daylight and so on. So obviously we're not just talking physically, we're talking spiritually. There is something that is considered AM, PM. Psychologically speaking, these two energies are very, very different from one another. So it's not just that the sun goes down and night descends, it's a new energy enters into the universe during nighttime. As you see from the Talmud I was describing. Talmud says the night was not created but for anything but for the girsa, to study. Which is reflective of the idea that, as I said earlier, when there's less noise, it's more of a time to contemplate. Fact is, at night, that you can have that ability. Some people have it very early in the morning too, before the world wakes up. So in a spiritual and psychological level, that I was speaking about relationships, a healthy relationship is give and take. It's a give and take with the comfort to be able to both give and to take. You know, you find relationships that are often imbalanced, where one person is basically always the giver and one is always the taker. One is aggressive, one is passive. Even if it may sound like it fits because it's convenient for both of them, one person happens to be passive, this one is aggressive. I don't think that long term could be a healthy relationship. I've never seen it last long term. As I said, it may be convenient, it may work for a while. But the question is it doing the best? Are they both becoming the best they can be? Or are they both being compromised? Because the fact of the matter is that the idea of being vulnerable and embracing vulnerability, which means not being aggressive, to being able to receive, being able to just be yourself, and not having to constantly perform, is an extremely necessary component in a healthy person's life. All healthy people have a very strong measure of that. They're able to be vulnerable. They're comfortable with being vulnerable. They even celebrate their vulnerability. That doesn't mean all the time, and doesn't mean with everyone, obviously, because there are situations where one person should have their guard up. You know, there are dangerous situations where you have to have your guard up. But if you only have your guard up, and you never have moments of vulnerability, healthy vulnerability, there's something lacking. So when God created the universe, He created a sun and a moon, put them both into heaven, and said you have two different personalities. Here's not the place to discuss the beginning of the story. It says they were both equally great luminaries, and then the moon came and complained that one king can't have two crowns, etc. And God said, if that's the case, diminish yourself. It's another discussion that's not really part of this context. It's actually the opposite of the discussion. That's when we talk about the diminishing of the moon and the strengthening of the sun. Here we're talking about the weakening of the moon and the strengthening of the weakening of the sun and the strengthening of the moon. So in a healthy balance, in that same Talmud, it talks about that the comparison of the Jewish people to the moon, David Hawakatan, Yaakov Hawakatan. It mentions many great people who are compared to the cotton, to the smaller luminary. So you see, in its own subtlety and in its own, in a sense, withdrawal and vulnerability, the moon has a power the sun does not have. Even on a physical level, as I described. It has its own particular glow. Now it's true in a world like ours, where aggression rules so often, and people get hurt, it's not a world where it's easy to be vulnerable. But the question is, how much do we bend over backwards the other way to put up such defenses that vulnerability becomes almost disappears? You know, for some reason I always use the examples of little children. I just had the birth of a grandchild, actually. My son, my firstborn, had a firstborn boy this past Friday. Okay. So, born very small, was very healthy, everything was good. So I went to visit him, and of course the first thing I always think about, you know, how I was when how all of us are in that stage. So I tell my son immediately, you know, make sure don't mess it up, of course. You know. freshly fallen snow. Not that I think he's going to mess it up, but I meant to say, the adult world, you know. I remember it was so emotional to me. Someone last year, on their birthday, sent me a picture of themselves when they were very little girl. And she writes to me, it was an email, she said, what happened to that child? You know, and I developed out of that an exercise. I thought that's a good Rosh Hashanah exercise. The truth is, it's all year round good exercise. To take out a picture of yourself when you were very young. Not just for nostalgic purposes, but it's an interesting thing. You know, what happened in the interim? Like what, and can you reconnect? And I don't mean reverting back to get back on your knees and start crawling around. I mean reverting back to the purity, to the innocence, before we ate from the tree of knowledge. So, young children, newborns, have that power to be able to elicit, because that's what it's like, a gift from God, untouched. And just amazing the things you can learn from the child. The child is completely vulnerable, completely dependent on everyone around. In both a beautiful way, and also you can say the dangerous way. The child can't protect itself. There's no tools. You know, God lets a child come out of its mother's womb. In its mother's womb, it's very well protected. But outside of the womb, it's not. I mean, obviously it has the natural protection of skin and hair, but we know how vulnerable, fragile a newborn is. And definitely dependent on others to feed it, to do everything. The child can't do anything on its own. You wonder, why did God create a state like that, a state of such utter vulnerability? Could have kept the child for not 9 months, 9 years in the mother's womb. I understand. That would not be very fair. But 9 months ain't fair either, frankly, if you think about it. I mean, men don't have to endure that. I remember, when was it, last year someone shared with me that her little niece, when she was pregnant, her niece comes over to her and says, or her daughter comes over, says, Mommy, or I forgot what she said, but how do you have room for another life inside of you? This woman shared this with me, and it was like an interesting insight of them from the mouth of babes. You know, men don't even have room for somebody outside of them, let alone inside. Imagine someone, you know, occupying space inside of you, real estate, not just valuable, your whole being changes. I never experienced it, but I imagine it. It's like to me, it's amazing. And it's not just a biological thing. You must say that the physiology and psychology of a woman, God created with the ability to do so. And obviously I see it as a virtue, with all the discomfort, but that ability to be able to have such bittul, you know, and that you have the ability to do it. So you have a child that God creates, very vulnerable. So I have no doubt one of the reasons is to teach us what vulnerability is about. It's not always bad. Because when the child has healthy parents, it's one of the greatest acts of nurturing and selfless commitment. Because you get nothing back from the child except, of course, the love that just you love your child. But there's the act of giving and nurturing a child that needs you completely. And even when the child is crying and maybe a nuisance and maybe you have sleepless nights, it's a powerful act of love. It's similar to when King David asked God the question, you have all the gold and silver in the world, why do you create class structure of poor and rich? And God says to him, because if not, with who then would do kindness in the world? In other words, God created a inequality because He trusted those that have more, that they'd be wise and understand it was only given to bring love into the world, not to hoard it. It's interesting, God trusted human beings. How many people actually know that? Do that? But I guess God trusted the divine image in which we were created and felt that ultimately people will understand that. So the similar thing with children. You know, people wonder why would God create children in a world where they can be hurt? And unfortunately they are hurt. Because there's the other side of it. It also teaches the power to love and to give. Now we have to be wise enough to understand, to cherish the gift that was given to us. So vulnerability, which is a completely misunderstood concept in our world. Most people, you say, do you like to be vulnerable? Most people will say, no, that's not very good to be vulnerable. Too many predators out there. But when you think about it, it actually happens to be the greatest gift. If someone says, if I could be vulnerable with another person and not be hurt and be cared for, it's one of the greatest things. It means you can just let go of everything and someone will care for you. You don't have to be afraid. But there's a lot of fear in the world, and for good reason. So the moon is a very vulnerable force. It's put there in the sky. The sun decides one day it's not going to send light. The moon is dead, basically, from the point of view of illumination. Now, I know that doesn't happen because the sun wasn't really given choice, but it's just a concept. It's a understanding, appreciation that we all have a moon inside of us. And this time of the year is when we focus on that power. Now, often when people lose something in their lives, a loss or other negative experiences, is when we are vulnerable, not by choice. We don't like it. But great things usually happen then, because it gets you out of your comfort zone and forces you to have to deal with the cracks. Leonard Cohen sings that the cracks in everything, but that's how the light gets in. He took that straight from verses in the Torah and Tanakh, that the cracks in existence is where the light comes. Now, of course, God should bless us all, hopefully, that we don't have any cracks, no losses, even if it's unrealistic, but that would be a great blessing. Yet, every one of us is going to have times when it's not going great. Even now, the economy, which is not just a question of confidence and security, but it shakes everybody up because the United States is the last bank. If this bank fails, who are we turning to next? What, Cambodia? I mean, like what? So the United States has been for the last 100 years or more the ultimate capitalist bank. And therefore it can accumulate trillions of dollars of debt, and people will fund that debt. But there's a big concern, maybe this is the end of capitalism. And what does it mean for us, and so on. The good news is my portfolio has not been affected in the least. You can figure out why on your own. But there are many that have been. And even healthy people, money, losing a lot of money, or the fear of losing it, or the psychology that is taking place, the demoralized psychology, has a deep effect on us. But Jews have survived much more than just bad economies, because they always understood the secret of the moon. And the secret of the moon is that it waxes and wanes. If you're a sun, and suddenly there's a crack, you've got a lot to be worried about. Because the sun thrives on transmitting. But someone who knows how to be vulnerable and has seen sometimes the worst, the abyss, has seen the cracks, knows that maybe the cracks actually are opportunities that teach us that we have to look at things in a new way. We're taking for granted our lives. You don't have to wait for a storm to strike to start building the roots. Which tree withstands a storm is the tree with the deep roots. But you can't start building roots when the storm strikes. Once a hurricane strikes, it's too late. You have to build it beforehand. So the message of the moon is one that very much reflects the message of Jewish history. Waxing and waning, almost dying, actually almost looks like it's dead, just to be reborn again. The sun has none of those fluctuations. Though there are sun flares and sunspots and sunstorms and solar fires and solar storms and so on, and they even create disruptions in the radio waves or other things. But it's relatively, the sun doesn't stop shining. The heat of the sun continues to reach the earth. You may go through a heat wave, may go through a cold spell, but the bottom line is life continues. Were the sun a few miles closer or a few miles more distant from earth, that would not be the case. So there's a balance there. With the moon, on the other hand, it really goes through very extreme cycles. But cycles allow for renewal. The sun doesn't have renewal. That means there's no ability to completely rebuild yourself. So in the cracks and in the diminishing, in the waxing and waning, there is great power. In psychological terms, there's great power in vulnerability. Great power in the ability to just be and receive, and not just be giving all the time. Now, it's not an easy thing to find someone you can trust in this world that you can be that way with. But the question is whether you can find, number one, firstly and foremost, within yourself. Do you have that part inside yourself? Are you able to speak to it? Are you able to speak to your child? Are you able to nurture yourself? So inside within us, we also have that dimension and that element. So in that context, when you think of the moon that way, you can relate to and understand that all the real powerful things I mentioned before, the sensuality of the moon, the romance of the moon, all these forces are all really a force that is connected to vulnerability, connected to sensitivity, to subtlety. The sun is not subtle. The sun is a driving, aggressive force. And for the good. That's what's needed there. The moon is very subtle, very gentle, When you think of it, all the poems written about the moon, they all have that element to it. Again, this is just a metaphor, but in talk about the moonlight within our own souls, you're talking about that subtle side. It's a part of us that diminishes and dies sometimes. Not dies completely, but weakens as we get older. Little young children, as I said, have it in full glory. That's their personality. When do they begin to? When do we begin to lose, so-called, that subtlety, that sensitivity? Is when we begin to have to feel, they deal with the harsh realities of life. The first time we're duplicitous, the first time we lie, first time we're disappointed. It's when life begins to wear on us. That's when we start, the sun begins to build, and the more it builds, the more aggressive it gets, the stronger it gets to protect ourselves. So, in direct proportion to that, diminishing of the moon within us becomes the strength of the sun. So obviously, the converse is also true. If you want to go back to the moon within you, you got to weaken the sun, which is why the Talmud says that the sun gets weaker from the 15th of Av and on. Now, interestingly, night for some is also a very depressing time. By day you can be busy, you get distracted, there are other people, rush hours, it's action. There's a party. By night, you're suddenly left on your own. Okay, there's nightlife, of course, and there's plenty of ways to party at night too. But sometimes night has that reminder, you end up going home alone. Sometimes night has a certain loneliness to it. It has a certain... Now, is this a positive or negative? As I said, but on the other hand, it also has the contemplative element to it. So it all comes down to how we use these it's called energies in our lives, how we apply them. Another element that I think is critical to point out, talk about the absorbing, is that, as I mentioned, the sun, its consistency is very powerful and very reliable. But the moon has a certain element of adventure. So when you see two personality types, who would you choose if you'd like to go have a date? Who would you choose? There are people who are like clerks in their clockwork. They're always on time, perfect. You can rely. You know exactly where they are, what they'll be doing, and so on. And then there's these people you never can rely on. And a time is not a time, a place is not a place. But on the other hand, that second type also has a spontaneity, a spark. It's exciting. Precisely because you never know where the person is at. There's adventure. Now, of course, the answer most of us will say is, I wish I could have a combination of both. But the fact of the matter is that something that's too reliable also becomes very, we call it monotonous. There's no spunk. There's no energy. So the fact is, in Jewish life, we actually find ways to reconcile between the sun personality, which is consistent, the moon personality, which is constantly shifting, to realize as like in a leap year, like this year, we actually reconcile the two by adding a month. I've discussed this other times. But when it comes to our personal relationships, there's an interesting thing that this moon, even though it is, as I said, a recipient of the sunlight, but it has its own spontaneity. I know the physical moon, we can measure its cycles, but the reflection of it in our lives is one that is going through shifts all the time. Here it's waxing, then it's waning, and so on. And it can be very disconcerting in a relationship when you have someone that you care about and love, but one day they're in, one day they're out. One day they're hot, one day they're cold. Because it's like it creates a instability. You don't know whether you can rely on it. So the challenge is, how can you find these two things combined? So we have examples. I've used the example before of a tree. A tree has deep roots that are firmly grounded. Those roots better not shift, or the tree is not going to stand long. But at the same time, the tree is shifting all the time. It's growing. And should the roots be compromised, should they dry out, or should they be severed in any way, the tree will not continue to grow. So, and hence the poem, deep roots bear beautiful fruits. Isn't that a brilliant rhyme? What do you think, Philip? Deep roots bear enduring fruits. which is also true psychologically speaking. It's interesting. Tree is the only thing that grows two directions at once. Have you ever heard about that? When NASA first went to outer space, early 60s, so since humans never went to a place that defied gravity, or there was no gravitational pull, so they sent all kinds of experiments out to outer space. One of them was a plant. A plant on Earth, its roots grow toward water, toward the sustenance. But in outer space, being that this plant would not have grounding, and therefore a compass, so to speak, so they wanted to see what would happen with a plant. So there was a plant on one of the first trips to the outer space, to the first, I think, orbit around Earth. And an interesting thing happened. They came back, the plant, they opened it up, and what would they see? There were roots growing all around the whole plant. There's absolutely no top, no bottom, because they completely out of whack. The plant had no clue where to go. So they grew roots from the top, from the bottom. It wasn't like a tree has roots in the bottom, they go into the ground, and the tree grows upward. You don't see roots growing upward. Here, the whole plant was covered with roots. So it reminded me of this story with Mendel Futterfasser of the Chassid. He was a great Chassid. And he was arrested. He was in Siberia for many years. He writes, he's he's no longer with us. And he talks about what kept him sane in this crazy Siberia and the Gulag. One of the things kept him sane was that he was around very interesting people. Because the Russians and the Soviets would, of course, arrest anyone that was too colorful. The writers, artists, performers, they were all in Siberia. That's where they sent them. Because they were the threat. They were free thinkers, rebellious, etc. So he had surrounded by these individuals, and his stimulation kept him going was he would speak to them, and they would share with him the secrets of their trade, and he would derive lessons for it, personal lessons in his life. A fascinating series of lessons. He had a guy that was a developer of deep sea excavation, and the lesson that he learned of how they lift very heavy weights was with balloons. Fascinating stuff. Many, many lessons. One of the lessons that he talked about was the one with the tightrope walker. So there was this time, I guess, because there were so many artists around, and they had really nothing to do. So every few months they would create this like circus. So everyone would perform. They all were brilliant. So they had this whole circus. They had a built-in circus. They would perform. They had jugglers and clowns. They had everything. And they also had a tightrope walker. So Mendel speaks about his conversation with his tightrope walker. What was the conversation about? So, what's the secret to tightrope walking? So most of us think it's balance. Of course, that's a factor, balance. Practicing balance on this rope, not falling. The tightrope walker shared with him that the secret, the key, was the focus, not on walking on the string, but on the destination. Key thing to learn was to keep your eyes set a certain type of stationary destination on the other side of the rope that was not moving, and your goal was to get there as quickly as possible and walking. It wasn't about constantly thinking about the rope beneath you and whether you're going to fall or not fall. It was keeping your eyes there, and that took a lot of training to get to a point where you can just walk even on a string because you're going there. And then the tightrope walker told him, so what do you think is the most difficult part of tightrope walking? So again, intuitively, most of us would say, when you're right in the middle and you're not like any edge, it's very scary. If you fall, we are at the beginning or the end, it's relatively easy. Tightrope walker said, no, the most difficult part is when you make the turn, which is at the edge actually, which is, you can just walk off, and not, because when you make the turn, you lose sight of the destination for a second. And because you lose sight of the destination, you have to refocus, recalibrate yourself again to get the focus. It's the turn is the hardest part. So Mendel and his Farbrengens would talk about the idea of, you have to have your eyes on the goal, destination in mind, the focus. And when the destination is compromised, your journey is compromised. Because it's like losing sight of where you're going. So you may veer off this way, that way, and so on. Which was similar to those roots. So when you talk about building solid roots at the same time growing, you could say here the sun has a great advantage because the sun is very secure. It has its power, you can rely on it. On the other hand, the moon is where life plays itself out. Because if we were just, as I said, the monotony of just having consistency, just roots, is not enough. Life has to play itself that we have to go on a journey. But the journey is grounded in a solid destination, a beginning point and an end point. And this is where I find most people really have the difficulty creating that type of focus, which is, of course, has the consequences that affect everything in our lives, the choices we make, relationships we commit to or don't commit to. Because it ultimately comes down to, it's not about the other person, is this the right person for me? It's about you. What are your goals? What is your destination? So beyond the platitudes, everyone says, I want to be happy, I want to find someone that I can love, and I love them. I have some security financially, I have a home, be able to travel. Everybody says that. And it's great, but it's not enough to define. It's not called a destination. That's called having certain basic things in place. Just like a house needs to have a kitchen and a dining room, a living room, a bedroom, a few other. That's what makes a home. But the spirit of the home is defined by the people, not by the rooms. So the same thing is here. That idea of knowing what is it that you want in your life. And I believe I submit that this is one of the reasons that we live in a world with such a dichotomy. We can have on one hand so much success in innovation, in technology, many other areas, standard of living, but so little success in our personal relationships. Because one requires a real destination. And having a successful technological life doesn't provide destination, it provides tools. It's like having a big tool chest. You have no idea what to do with it, besides obviously using the tools. What do you do with it? What are the goals? And here's where the problem with absorbing comes back into play. If we as children were asked this question, and our parents or educators and adults would have encouraged us to ask and ask and ask and explore and don't give up, and by the time you're a teenager, make sure you're consumed with this. Not consumed with getting high marks to get yourself into Ivy League school or something else like that. Consumed with finding out what is your destination. If in our absorbing stage this is what was emphasized, trust me, we live in a different world. What happens instead is children are shaped into becoming children, adults in the making, and our whole education system is about how to turn them into us, which I find that quite abusive actually. It would be nice that the children should turn us into them. Instead, we're turning them into us. Now, when I say us, we were once them, and they are, it's a one big vicious cycle. Again, I'm not suggesting that we revert back to our immature, childish years, but the powers that the child have, that innocence I was referring to, the moon-like state is what's lacking, deeply lacking. So I think we live in a world where the sun is in pretty good shape, relatively speaking, because there's plenty of aggression in this world. We've got a lot of light, electricity. We're generating and generating and generating and transmitting, right? We transmit a lot. I don't know if our outgoing calls are more than our incoming calls, but it doesn't matter. They're both transmit. But receiving, on the receiving end, and I'm talking about the absorbing end, that is very, very weak in our times. We don't value it. We don't consider it a virtue. At best someone will say, okay, I had my years in school, that's when I was receiving, now I'm giving, now I'm transmitting, but appreciation of the ability to step back. And that's why I referred back to myself. The years that I did that were so refining. They changed my whole life, because today I'm able to retrieve that. I do know, if I want to, how to listen. And I'm not saying this to toot my own, I'm just saying it as a life experience. And you can literally change. Let's say you have a day where things aren't going that well, or other things. When you know how to turn that on, the absorber part, you literally change your whole personality. Because you go back to a whole different, it's a moon-like personality, not a sunlight. We're forced in this world to become suns because we have to provide for ourselves. Rent is high, we have expenses, we have all kinds of forces that we have to contend with. There's competition, there's all the peer pressure, social pressure. I mean, your life story. And it's a solar type of, maybe it is a solar storm, full of flares going on. But the ability to just kick back and be a moon is not something that's very much cherished. So we do, since our souls need it and crave it, obviously, we find moments. That's why people say, I'm going away for a week, be at a beach, some serene place. It's a very nurturing thought. Once you get there, it's another story, whether it always works out. For a son, living 30, 40 years being a son and suddenly trying to be a moon for a week is not so easy. But the dream, at least, the fantasy sounds good. Because we are essentially looking for serenity. There's no personality that every one of us, no matter how far your engine has been revved up, and you're so accustomed to be in high gear, there's an element, we all have that dream of being able to just quiet down. And when you do, it's very refreshing. But it's not necessarily natural. At least to our, when I say natural, I mean it's really the true natural, but it has become not natural because we're so accustomed to another lifestyle. I'm a New Yorker, so I know this. I remember when I traveled around the country, to me, I was like going crazy when I went to cities, wherever they, even big cities, where 9 o'clock, if you made a phone call, you were like considered like extremely rude. In New York, I began making phone calls 10 o'clock, I mean, not to everybody, but a number of people. And I remember in Cincinnati, I said, can I call him? It's 10 to 9. 10 to 9? You're crazy. And so I said, what, he's sleeping? No, it's just you don't call anybody at night. It's the night energy. Maybe that's going to... So, in New York, and of course New York is not seen as a foreign country everywhere else in the United States. And the truth is, I'm addicted to the city never sleeps thing. So you go to other cities, but it's, I don't know how healthy it is. It's just an addiction of like constantly being a high octane lifestyle. But the natural flow of it, and then I look again back to the little children, whether they're born in New York or wherever they're born, they naturally have their own little flow. They don't go by the rush hours and the forces out in the streets. So, we all have our challenges, and I think that for me at least, I say as a New Yorker, I think I have peace inside. I don't think I'm driven inside. I could be very peaceful, like an eye of a tornado. When we used to work, I remember those intense nights and days in my office. So we had different types of. I used to work with a colleague of mine who was, if there was one, if you didn't hear a pin, if you could hear a pin drop, that was too much for him. You needed total silence to work. And I was the opposite. The more noise, the better it was for me. I don't know why. It was a different way, and we used to always argue about this. He used to say, how could you work at so much noise, such a racket? But it was like a type of thing of you be able to go into your own inner space. And you have that, like, maybe the eye of a tornado is a good example. It's very calm there, at least for a while. Right? I don't know what happens after a while. If the tornado moves, the eye better move, right? So you have to maneuver as well. Well, each of us has our own so-called challenges. So that's why I think that in Judaism, you have many, many opportunities. Shabbos is maybe the classical example of shutting down. Forget about the religious elements of it. Talk about the psychological and emotional. And there's no surprise, therefore, that Shabbos is such a family-oriented day. Family, it's an intimate day in many ways. Because precisely you shut down the sun, you weaken the sun, the moon begins to emerge, metaphorically speaking. And the same is true with other moments. And it's interesting, it's like imposed. There are people tell me who started keeping Shabbos that they love it, because it's like there's no way out. Every sixth day, seventh day, this is it. And even when you're not in the mood. And it forces a certain type of tranquility. I know that sounds weird. Forced tranquility ain't tranquility in my mind, but when I say forced, it means that you have committed that every 7 days, this is what you're going to do. And if you're able to surrender to that, it can be extremely healing. And the same is true with other points in our lives where we have that ability. The ability to stop the machine, slow down, and just focus on something. There's a interesting Seder HaYom is a book of a middle-aged sage, and he writes, he speaks about there are 3 prayers in the Jewish day. There's the morning prayer, Shachris, there's the afternoon prayer, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. So Mincha is considered to be almost the shortest, it is the shortest, doesn't have a Shema in it. Yet the Talmud says something, that a person should always be careful, especially with Mincha, because because Eliyahu Novi responds, or was responded to actually, during the time of Mincha. So the Seyyum asked the question, and the obvious question, the morning prayer is the longest prayer. You focus before you begin the day, before you immerse in the marketplace, you focus. Ma'ariv, the evening prayer, is at the end of the day, when you're winding down. But Mincha is the middle of the day. And why is it such a powerful prayer? And his answer is precisely for the reason I said before. Because in the morning and evening, it punctuates the day, you're not in the middle of anything else. Before you start and after you end. Mincha, precisely because it's the middle of the day, you're on the roller coaster. And you're in the merry-go-round. That's not words he uses, I'm just using them. In the rat race, or whatever you want to call it. And you're running and running and running. And you're able to stop yourself in mid-marathon and say, there's a focus to something greater. I need an oasis. That has great power. Because it means you're in control of your life. It means that you're able to, at will, all kinds of important appointments and other things, and you can say, you know, I'm busy now and so on. You create your priority. Tragically, I say this, there are people, say they're too busy for anything. And God forbid the tragedy strikes, they're suddenly not that busy. They find time. Because it's about priorities. It's not about whether you're too busy. It depends what is considered to be a priority. Obviously, if it's not a priority, you're going to say you're too busy. God forbid there's crisis, and suddenly you stop. Things change. There's a danger, it's crisis. We don't have to wait for crisis to be able to control our lives, let's put it that way. We have to be able to stop yourself mid-motion at times. It's a very healthy exercise because it allows you to create focus. It allows you to say, no matter what's going on in my material life, there's a higher reality. There's a higher purpose, a higher calling. And that essentially is, again, another example, manifestation of the sun and the moon. And I can go on and on. There are many, many examples of all of this. And I just want to say this also again on a personal note, in our own personal lives. It's not easy to train someone to become a moon after they've been a sun for a long time. It's not easy to teach someone to learn how to absorb because we've been hurt. Even if we're ready and receptive to the idea of being vulnerable or absorbing, the next question, of course, is where am I going to find someone that's going to appreciate that? There's so many obstacles. Even if you set your mind to it, they're going to just weaken your resolve. So I'm not being naive here and saying anyone can just do it like that. But there's no question that if you begin to think in this way, possibilities will arise. I don't say they'll happen in the moment, but if you allow yourself to dream or to envision the possibility of yourself, not as sun-like, but more moon-like, there's no question that it will have an impact. So the first step is obviously to imagine, to envision, to dream for it, to hope for it. Because if you don't do that, then there's definitely no hope. Then it will definitely remain buried. So life is short, even though we think it's long, and we have opportunities all the time. So I thought this period of time, as the Talmud says, the sun gets weaker. We're not talking obviously the beautiful parts of the sun, there's virtues and all the things I mentioned. We're talking about this aspect. Once a year, there's a period where the sun starts getting weaker. There will be a period where the sun starts getting stronger, and that's healthy too. Hopefully we'll talk about that when that cycle takes place. But now we're in a different part of the cycle. Now we're in the cycle where the summer is waning. And thank God it doesn't just happen overnight, it's a process. And soon these trees will begin to shed their leaves, and the fall season will begin. And then we'll go into the winter season, which, as we know, is also that type of where the sun is at its weakest in a way. We still have sunlight, but it's not that intense. So the cold of the winter can be seen by us as a negative. Most people you ask like the summer, they'd rather have the heat of the summer than the cold of the winter. Is that accurate in this group here? Yes or no? You're undecided? Okay. I'll report that to the pollsters that they're undecided. But there is a beauty in each of them. There's a beauty of the cold of the winter, that it does force you to withdraw. Trees as they shed their leaves, and the birds as they travel south, and the other factors that happen when the cold sets in. have a very necessary process in the cycle of life. Winters are necessary. It's necessary for trees to withdraw, and it's necessary for the cold to emerge. Excuse me. So the same is true in our own lives. Everything is about balance. As I said at the outset, it's a cycle. It's a energy, and now the energy begins to go in the other direction, which causes a person to be more introspective. In the winter, actually, people are much more introspective than in the summer, because the summer, precisely because of the warmth, because of the lightness of spirit, and so on. The winter is the winter blues, some people call it, but it could also have another dimension. It is ability to think about things. You're more indoors. It's less frolicking, less frivolousness. Doesn't mean you can't be frivolous in the winter. And of course we've mastered the elements. But if you think about it psychologically, it has elements that allow us to look inward. So maybe it's also not a surprise, therefore, that this season, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, now in the Southern Hemisphere, it's middle of the winter. But at least in the Northern Hemisphere, Israel and so on, and America and the United States, we also, Elul, as we enter this season, Tezvav Av begins to, with the summer, the nights begin to get longer, and also begins the leading into Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So the introspective period of the year comes at the beginning, basically, at the end of the summer, beginning of the spring. It's not an accident. It's all part of that process. So may I wish upon all of you that use this time well. Tomorrow, check out the sunset. So some people look at sunsets. Tonight the sun was beautiful as it was setting. That red sun, meaning tomorrow's going to be a nice warm day, they say, whatever. But there's so the sunset is beautiful for some of the sight of the sun setting. There's another part of it, is that the sun setting also is the merging of the moon. And I think that if we use the cycle properly and go with the flow, there are great things that can happen. So being that some of you may need a blessing for finding your soulmate, so it's also not an accident that on the 15th of Av is the Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day. I don't know what Sadie Hawkins is, but that's what they call it. It's a day where, day of Shidduchim, it's a day of Zivugim, of soulmates. And that's the reason, interestingly, the day where the sun starts getting weaker and the moon starts getting stronger is the day when is a day of relationships. Because as I said earlier at length, that even though in a relationship you need to have a sun and a moon, a mashpia and a makabel, a giving and taking, but if the giving is too strong and there isn't ultimately the vulnerability, the ability to receive, a relationship cannot really flourish. Because at the end of the day, as much as giving is necessary in a relationship, receiving is much more necessary. So when two people who know how to receive from each other, that's when you have a healthy relationship. Two people who know how to give to each other. I don't mean that being giving. Obviously being giving is a necessary component. But I mean to say if everybody's just giving and nobody's able to just, essentially, in other words, everyone thinks of it, what's in it for me? Instead of saying, I just love that person even if I'm not at this point getting something in return, that's a very necessary component. Or using the word that I often use, the bittul word, bittul, B-I-T-T-U-L, malchus, lesla magarma klum, sira lesla magarma, the moon, malchus, doesn't have anything of its own, is ultimate bittul. But never to be confused with weakness or annihilation. This is a bittul of strength. This is the bittul of the strongest person on earth able to be silent. People who have a lot to say when they're silent, that takes a lot of strength, a lot of energy. So never confuse the moon with weakness. It's not weakness at all. It's the resilience and the ability to even be disappear if necessary, and knowing that you won't disappear. People who are insecure think if they're not heard or not seen, they may be forgotten. The truth is they will be forgotten, but they can't do anything about it. Bittul understands that bittul cannot become bottle, basically. In other words, something that its personality does not need to always express itself can't really be annihilated because it doesn't need expression. Its silence can be silenced because its invisibility gives it eternal power. This is the secret of vulnerability. It's the secret of true relationships. No, but we live in a sun world, in a world that's driven by, as I said, aggression. Driven by, you got to go out and get it. And if you don't get it, no one's going to get it for you. That's all true about material possessions, acquisitions. It's not true about anything that's real. I challenge anyone to sell me something that's real. When I say real, eternal, like love, like I mean, maybe that's the best example of all. Happiness. Anything that has true personality, meaning something that is enduring and that is not dying, eroding, or subject to the elements of nature, you cannot acquire. It emerges when you do the right things. It always emerges. Truth. You can't go buy truth. Anyone trying to sell it to you definitely probably doesn't have it. You know, communists had a Jewish chapter. It's called the Ifsektia. The Jewish communists. They even had to use a newspaper, which was total propaganda. This newspaper, interestingly, what would they call the newspaper that's total propaganda? Emes. You know? Truth. Like the newspaper called Truth. Would you trust a newspaper that was called Truth? Truth.com. Yeah. But the interesting thing is, you know how Emes was spelled? So we spell Emes, Aleph, Mem, Sof. Even in Yiddish, that's how you spell it. And so there's a reason we spell it that way. They spelled it Ayin Mem, Ayin Samach. The Yiddish words, which is the untruthful way to spell truth, basically. So someone that really understood and read it said, yeah, this is great. Now, I was thinking that maybe it was some Jew there that actually wanted to demonstrate that it's not true, so he spelled it Emes, and the communists didn't have any clue. So it's like a guy spelling truth like T-R-C-T-L or something. So anyone reading it who's not illiterate will understand that this is not truth, even though they're trying to convey that message. Now, Emes, in Hebrew, the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalemite Talmud says, is made up of 3 letters. Aleph is the first Hebrew letter of the alphabet. Tov is the 22nd of the Hebrew alphabet, and Mem is the 11th. And there's a reason, because Ani Rishon v'Ani Achrin, meaning truth has to be true from the beginning, through the middle, through the end. If anything is true only in any isolated area, under certain conditions, it's not really true. That's why in scientific experiments, for instance, you have to test something not just in one environment, in different climates, different heat and cold, different environments that allow you to really see, is it true, or is it only true in a certain circumstance? Emes is spread out. It couldn't be spread out more, because it's the first, last, and middle letters of the alphabet. Ayin Mem, Ayin Samach has nothing to do with that. Sheker, just for the record, just in case you're wondering if it's a coincidence, Sheker is the antithesis of truth. It means a lie. And what 3 letters are Sheker? The next to 3 letters of the alphabet, the 19th, 20th, and 21st letters of the alphabet. Shin, Kuf Reish, Shin. Because Sheker ein le raglayim, it says, lies have no feet to stand on their own. Basically, a lie is never secure. It always needs other lies to surround it, because one lie has to protect the next. So they have to hang out near each other. Emes is secure enough to be everywhere. Aleph, Mem, so wherever you turn, it's Emes. You know, when you lie, one of the problems is that years pass, and you don't know what you said, what was a lie and what wasn't a lie. So you have to start making other lies to protect the first lie. When you say the truth, all you got to do is repeat what happened, and that's it. So, since I'm sure in a room of no liars here, and so you know, you don't carry the burden and the energy and all the intensity that a lie creates, because it has to really, as I say, occupy a lot of hard drive space, because it needs other lies to be shin kufresh, to hang around with it. So Emes is the same idea, that type of ability to be true consistently. So, on a concluding note, I wish you all a very truthful week and life. And above all, as I said, in relationships, the key is the moonlight. And that's why the moon has that romantic element that the sun doesn't have. And on Tu B'Av, on the 15th of Av, is specifically designated to that, because it has the combination of a little less weaker sun, a little more moon, a little less day, a little more night. the night energy, the deepest of all energies. So everyone have a very pleasant week, and I just want to make an announcement that the next 2 weeks there will not be a class here. I'll be traveling overseas, but I will be recording, so we'll be live online. So I definitely miss you, but I'm bringing the message to other parts of the world. I'm actually going to the Southern Hemisphere, to the winter, to find out what's going on. And I'll tell you when I get back. South Africa. So, yeah, leaving tomorrow. So if anybody wants to send messages to South Africa, you can let me know. I will be back, however, and in full force. I just wanted to make that announcement. We'll announce it also by email, so make sure that, and please tell anyone. So if you come here and I'm not here, that's not the end of the world either. You could maybe speak to each other. But I will, that's the schedule. So, until we see each other again, good night. Thank you very much. Let me make 2 announcements. Absolutely. Doesn't yet have a name rather. My son had a son, so Philip is reminding us until we name the son. So it's in honor of my grandchild, and his mother is Devorah, and Mendel is my son. And may everybody be blessed with all kinds of simchas. Philip's class will be taking place tomorrow, 7 p.m. Philip is standing right here. Cute guy. You know, I give my weekly. Still cute. What can I tell you?
Just a moment.
Yeah, and Philip has been many years my student, colleague, and is teaching for many years. So definitely call upon him. And if you haven't left your email address or a way to stay in touch, send out a weekly email, please do so. And above all, please see me, see our staff, see our team here as an ally. And together we shall bring a lot of moonlight and sunlight to this world.
If you're interested in some of the upcoming activities we have going on at the Meaningful Life Center, our republication of some new books, possibly at the Meaningful Life Center, we will let you know what we're up to. There's some good stuff. Just want to include everybody in.
Absolutely. And thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.